Perfect, I think. Okay, we both are on the same. So, any plans for the weekend, or did I block you for some time?
Yeah, Super Bowl tomorrow, right? So,
Super Bowl?
yeah.
Okay. So you watch in Atlanta, we have any game?
No. I'm just watching it. It's friend's place. So,
Okay. So Lalesh, are you ready?
I think he's on mute.
Wait, I'll call him and then we will start off. I think it's already 51.
Sir.
Shall we? Huh? Yeah. Put the live for TV5 as well. Okay. Oh, I think we have one of the guy who is also in M&A. He saw this flyer and he called me, and he wrote some of the questions too. So I prepared some, and you prepared. I think probably we'll try to concise as much as possible, and definitely.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to have it in two parts, we can do that also. And if the
yeah, sure, we can.
Since there are too many, we can do it in two parts. Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. Very interesting story, Madhugar, about you. I saw that how you came from NIIT like all of us. But 1991 was a golden period, I believe. Of course, 2000 was little rough, but you made it into a different aspect. See,
1991 was very rough. It was the recession.
Oh, at the time as well? Oh, because we were like, I was in 10th maybe. I was in 9th, complete 10th.
91 was also recession. Yeah.
Okay. But why didn't you go into similar business, Madhukar?
Huh?
Why didn't you go to the similar business of software services or software development?
Well, that becomes operations. So, whereas this gives me, a lot of variety, dealing with different companies, etc. So so you can. I think I'm not suited to running operations for a very long time. So I want something that keeps changing and variety, and so that was an important consideration.
I think
moving out of operations.
Yeah, operations is also a stressful job. Over a time, it's very, very stressful.
Yeah, and the excitement of new things is a little limited.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That was the main reason.
Okay.
Sir, line lo undali atane.
Okay.
So where is their studio?
In India.
Hyderabad? Or?
Hyderabad.
10, 9,
ready.
8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 8. Go, sir, live.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to Mana TV TV5. You are watching InSight with Praveen Puram live from Atlanta. We have been doing number of shows around the entrepreneurship. Today, we just start one other aspect of M&A, mergers and acquisition. Why is it important and how is it useful to the community? So this is one of the thought where Mr. Madhu has accepted our esteemed guest today. Good morning, Madhugar, for your time.
Good morning, good evening to all the viewers in India.
Thank you. Let's get into the introduction. So I will definitely introduce Madhu. The reason we chose Madhu is he is also like us an NRI or an Indo-American community. And his story of how he came in 1991 and what he has done and more, we will get into the detail. Before that, I would like to introduce you, Madhu, to the audience so that they know who you are. Mr. Madhusudan is the founder and CEO of Vector Spam. He's an enterprise that enables companies to plan their growth exit strategies, engineer inorganic growth and cross-border transactions successfully. He was an early member of NIIT in India. In 1991, he relocated to US and he was the president and COO at the time. He led NIIT's largest overseas operation and was nominated twice for the Atlanta International Business Award for outstanding leadership and role in the growth of Atlanta as an international business center. Subsequently, he became president of NIIT Ventures and led new venture investment initiatives and M&A in US and Europe. An accomplished deal maker, his core competencies include strategic analysis, business evaluation, cross-border issue management, M&A transaction management, and complex negotiations. He's active in TIE and served as a global trustee, chairman, and president of TIE Atlanta. As a speaker, he has addressed audiences at events of the World Bank, IFC, IMF, Institute for International Research, World Education Market, Council for Entrepreneurial Development, Georgia Tech, Emory University, Columbia Business School, SIBF, IIT Mumbai, and UNESCO. At the University of Michigan, he led several boot camps for business owners on exit strategy and value maximization. As a philatelist, he has won several awards in international exhibitions and was recognized by the Government of India for his services to Indian philately. He studied at the St. Joseph College, Bangalore, and the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. His professional education includes business evaluation at the Harvard Business School. What a fantastic journey, Mr. Madhu. So we really appreciate your time this morning, and most of our audience are business owners as well in the Indo-American community. The main interest here would be to understand what is M&A and what are the strategies of exit, right? So before we get into that, we just wanted to know your journey. How did you get into this M&A? And in a nutshell, in 5 minutes, if you can explain what are the struggles from 1991 to today, and if you can explain the journey, that would be great.
Sure thing. Thank you for having me here, Praveen. So I joined NIIT when it was a startup. So it was a very interesting experience because every day was different, because you had the freedom to do anything you wanted in terms of products, in terms of markets, in terms of strategies, etc. So I used to run their operations in Bangalore and then in Bombay. And by that time, NIIT had also scaled up a little bit and become a larger company with a lot of headcount. And our basic systems were not there for HR, for information systems, for corporate planning, etc., which you needed to scale the company. Mm-hmm. I moved to Delhi to set up all those functions. And in 1990, India went through a major foreign exchange crisis. Mm-hmm. This is all pre-liberalization. And India had about 1 week's foreign exchange, which was adequate to buy oil. So there was a clampdown on all of the other import type activities. And NIIT was importing a lot of products from the United States, software and training products. So we had to figure out a way of getting dollars into India to run the business, existing business. So I moved to the US in 1991. And the idea was to see what we could do here so that we could earn some dollars and send them home. So that was another startup experience after India in the US, looking at this market, trying to figure out what to do, because money was very hard to come by at that time. The Reserve Bank of India was very control oriented. Mm-hmm. Every dollar had to be accounted for, etc. So I came here and realized that the market was very mature for traditional education, IT education business. Mm-hmm. So we could not launch that, nor did we have the money to launch it. So we ended up launching product development services here in the United States. And we started with IBM as a customer, and that's why I'm in Atlanta. They were our first customer. So I used to live next to them, meet them every week, collect the money because you needed that for cash flow. So it was from that view, a bootstrap type of operation. And that business took off extremely well. And NIIT became one of the largest product development companies in the training marketplace, building a lot of products for IBM, and then a whole host of computer companies, from Oracle to HP to Sun Microsystems. You name it, they were all customers. And the other business, of course, was software services around Sybase, which was an NIT partner. So both these businesses took off well, and then we also launched a products business under the NIT brand name that took off well. And so fast forward, by that time, India liberalized. So it became a lot easier to do business, in terms of investments, etc. And NIT, we realized that, we had not invested adequately in the US market for its size. Most of it was bootstrap. So we decided that, we should set up a M&A fund and a M&A initiative. So at that time, I moved from running operations, into running M&A. And we hired Goldman Sachs and Pricewaterhouse and created a dream team, and because we did not have much experience in M&A.
Okay.
And so towards 99 or so, that's when I moved completely into NIT Ventures to look at these investments. And as you know, markets go up and down. And as we started this initiative, the market was in a dot-com frenzy. So all the assumptions we had made on valuations, etc., were completely blown away. And we could not do a traditional acquisition, even though we had set aside $100 million of fund at that time, which was a first for any, I would say, Indian group to be so aggressive on M&A. But the dot-com valuations were crazy, and we could not do a transaction in that environment. In fact, it was hard to find appointments to meet people you wanted to buy because they had so many investment bankers after them, and valuations were completely crazy. Just to give you a thumb rule at that time, if you were in professional services, the valuation was $1 million per head.
Wow.
So if you had a 100 people team, you could think of $100 million of valuation. So it's just crazy valuations. So we decided that it's not going to work. So what we ended up doing was to set up a venture fund. And the idea was to take small slices of equity, using cash and services as currency.
Okay.
And to become and to invest in businesses that had synergy with the NIT core business.
Okay.
So for example, we invested in a company that gave legacy modernization technology, automated code translation from traditional code, Fortran, COBOL, etc., into C, C++, Visual Basic, etc., that automatic conversion. And that opened up the whole business around legacy transformation, which is a very important business now. Similarly, there were other opportunities, like, for example, doing work in the insurance space, a company that was doing work in the insurance space. And that company, we ended up investing, built all of their software, and then eventually sold it to ADP. So those were all very interesting themes. And then in a 2-year horizon, the market crashed.
Oh my God.
Because dot-com crash happened. And the same companies we were looking at pre-dot-com were now available.
Absolutely.
So then we went and did those acquisitions. We did a few acquisitions here in the US. So I used to look at all those acquisitions from concept to governance, the full life cycle. And so we bought product companies, we bought services companies, we bought companies in the United States, we bought companies in Europe. And this was a very interesting time for me, because every deal is new learning. And it kind of keeps you on your toes, because you have to look at items at the strategic level, but you also have to look at the nuts and bolts.
Absolutely.
Each one becomes important, right? So I used to find that very exciting. So in 2008, I set up with my partner VectorSpan. And I looked at two things really. One is I found that companies that do acquisitions find it very difficult to integrate cross-border transactions. They find it difficult to do cross-border transactions in the first place because either they don't have experience in those markets or they don't understand all the nuances of doing those transactions and then managing those people. I'm talking of non-Indian owned companies now.
Got it.
Similarly, what I found was I met probably 200, 250 founders of companies because I was on the buy side and they were on the sell side. And I could see the kinds of mistakes they make, which would hurt their own valuation. And most of the time, they were not aware of that. So I said, this is an interesting space, and maybe this is where we should focus on. So that's what we do today. We focus on, for the larger companies, we focus on helping them look at acquisitions, especially cross-border acquisitions, or if they want to sell a business unit, we help them sell that business unit. And similarly for founders, we help them think through their exit strategy. It may take 2 years, 5 years, whatever, but thinking that and helping them make sure that they have taken all the safeguards to protect their valuation or increase their valuation, and then help them with the transaction. So that's what we do today.
Very, very interesting journey, Mr. Madhu. So typically an Indian mindset, right? When you come to this country, we always think of buying and how to expand. So during that 99s and 2000 phase, you have been into multiple positions, from operations to services to product development and to M&A. I know that you said that there is every time you have a change in different companies, the strategies. What made you think from the money, right? Everyone thinks of money, how to earn money. So when you talk about M&A and when you talk about a product development or services, if I were to choose, I will choose selling my services or product development to make money. So how did you think in those days you can make money in M&A? What was your couple of things you might have inspired and thought that this is a good area to earn?
Well, we used to meet a lot of investment bankers for one. So I had a frame of reference to say how they operate, etc. But I think more important was the fact that in M&A, you can significantly alter the value through your expertise.
Okay.
And that makes a lot of difference. So for example, how do you position a company? At what valuation do you position a company, right? It's a pretty open area because companies are not commodities.
Absolutely.
It's not real estate. So
Absolutely.
you don't have clear, especially private companies. Public companies, you already have the benchmarks, where the share price is traded, etc. There's a set valuation for public companies. It's a public valuation in the share market. But for private companies, there is no such thing. And a lot of times, value is created by, first of all, positioning the company well.
Okay.
How you tell the story, right? How do you highlight? What do you highlight, etc. And what we find is that a lot of business owners start looking at their operational problems more and more and more. And they don't put value to the real successes they've had. And that's also a little bit of an Indian mindset, where you're a little humble, and and secondly, you also don't think something you have achieved, you don't think that is fantastic. You always focus on this HR problem or that compliance issue or this customer satisfaction issue. You're always caught in the operational drama. And so for us, the excitement is, how do you pull these guys out of that operational thinking that they are stuck in, and help them visualize the real value of their business. So there, the value add is very significant.
Absolutely. I think you told the right points. We always think on the operational problems, how you have to scale and how you have to build the company. And telling the story is very important today, as you rightly said. So coming to your M&A strategy, it is a one-time strategy or it's a maintenance? You should be part of the companies guiding them overall. How does this work?
For growing companies, M&A is not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process. It's part of their strategic growth. So typically what we do is we get involved in the planning cycle itself, because companies, when they do their planning, let's say they're thinking of a 3-year horizon or a 5-year horizon, they're thinking along those lines, then what they can do is they can differentiate what they're going to do organically, which is through operations, and second, what they're going to do through an M&A or a strategic initiative or a joint venture or whatever. So we help them break the growth problem into these two parts. The organic part, they run themselves because that's what their operations team does. And on this part, which we call inorganic or loosely M&A or growth strategy, that's where we help them actually look at what are the alternatives. We go to the market, we find specific companies that may be of interest to them, and then we manage all of the transaction related activities for them. So that's how the model works.
Absolutely. I think before we get into the details of the M&A, I would ask you a basic question. Why are the businesses sold in the first place? What do you think? Why are they sold?
The business is an organic thing. So it never can be left on a sustaining basis on an autopilot. It doesn't work, right? Because a lot of things change. First are the people related issues. So if you take founders, for example, every founder guaranteed grows older every day.
No choice.
Right? So they grow older, they get married, they have kids grow up, kids have to get married, then there are grandkids. So you have on one side the family related issue, which means that if you could spend 20 hours a day when you were a bachelor, as your age goes up, you will have less and less time to spend on your business.
Absolutely.
Energy goes down. Especially if you have had success, capability of taking risk goes down. Then there may be health related issues.
Absolutely.
And so on. So it's the nature of things that from a founder perspective, things will slow down. And the question the founder has to ask is, will I allow this slowdown to happen? Will I become the bottleneck to the business? So that is one aspect of why you should think about growth. And growth and exit are synonymous. Because you want to create value. You can either create value by staying the course. You can create more value by making changes. And you can make even more value by bringing in outsiders who can help. Just like you do with your management team. You bring in a management team for more energy, for more vigor. The same way. Similarly, the business itself is not constant, right? Because businesses have life cycles.
Absolutely.
So what was hot in the 90s and thriving in the 90s, if you stayed on with it in the 2000s, it would not work. I mean, take, for example, some of the really big brand names. Take, for example, IBM PC. Rocking success, or IBM mainframe. Rocking success, workhorse of the industry, and then it's no longer now, IBM PC is no longer IBM.
Absolutely.
Right? Take Motorola. Same story, up and gone. Yeah? Take Apple, the survival issues with Apple. Take Microsoft, how they missed the internet revolution and lost out. Take Google now. See the pressure they have on the chat from ChatGPT, right? Suddenly they are now, their position in the market is threatened. That happens to every business because technology changes, market needs change. And if you have not been investing continuously and rejuvenating yourself, reinventing yourself, chances are that your business is also going to slide. We see this very much with product businesses. Because product businesses, you make a lot of initial investment, get a lot of headwind, and you are scaling nicely. And over a period of time, especially with license models, companies used to have new license revenue and maintenance revenue.
Absolutely. Now we don't.
Right. Yeah, well, that is part one, that whole model is gone. But even in that model, as the founders grow older and stop investing in new product development, the license part shrinks and the maintenance part expands. And over a period of time, customers stop using the product. So new product license is also gone, maintenance is also gone. So that's the aspect around business, right? The third is around operational issues. Like, for example, cash flow could be an issue. You may have taken on debt and there is a balloon payment that is coming up and you don't know how to handle that balloon payment. So you could have business pressures of that kind. You could have competitive pressures. Like, for example, you could have a venture-led company competing with you or a private equity-led company competing with you. And you need to have profits to continue your business, whereas there they don't care because they are creating value by scaling dramatically. Their focus is not on the bottom line. So they are spending money like there's no tomorrow on sales. They're beating you on pricing, they're stealing your contracts, etc., because their objective is different, whereas you have to run your company for cash flow. So you have all these contradictions. Then sometimes there are industry changes itself, which may affect you. And then there may be environmental changes. So whole host of these factors dynamically change every day. And therefore, you cannot sit still enjoying your success. You have to think, and the only sure way of surviving is growth. There is no other way of surviving.
Yeah.
So and that's why this process becomes important.
So absolutely, very clearly, I understand that sustaining the same business to the trajectory, we need to think from the technology, from the investment, from the change of people, bringing new talent. So tell me one thing. If I am into business, for example, when do I need to think to sell? What is the point? And do I need to think from the start how I need to evaluate my company? Tell us more from a basic company, if any of our Indo-Americans are putting. What is that we need to think of building the company, evaluating the company, and selling? What are the points to trigger?
Okay. The first thing is that a lot of times we think of exit as a failure.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the first issue around mindset that we have to change. Now, exit is not failure. Yeah. That's a very important message. The second is that a good analogy for this is, do you want to be the owner of a very big part of a very small pie? Or do you want to be own a small piece of a much larger pie? Right? And that's a conversation the owner has to have with himself or herself. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of times we find that business owners are so their identity is so mixed up with their own company's identity that they cannot think rationally about these kind of issues. Mm-hmm. So one of the most important things is to create that awareness, saying that, look, you have to separate yourself from the business. It's not the same. So as a business owner, you have to look at the business in a certain way. As the CEO of the business, you have to look at the business in a certain way. Mm-hmm. So you have to start looking at it from these perspectives and start creating a little bit of distance and treat the organization or the company not as yourself, not as your identity. Mm-hmm. Especially, a lot of times founders have their names attached to the
companies. Yeah.
Yeah. So whether it's Ambani Enterprises or whatever else, it doesn't matter. But it's very strong linkage, right? And your identity, your concept of self-worth, everything is attached to that. And in that context, exit seems to be, what am I doing here? But the concept of exit is very different. The concept of exit is, how do you bring outside capital into your business?
Okay.
Right? To make the business more successful.
Mhm.
So that is one aspect of exit. The second aspect of exit is if you talk to most bankers, they will tell you that private companies owners, their wealth is mostly sitting in their private stock,
Mhm.
which is the stock in their company, equity in their company. And that is not liquid.
Okay.
So you may be worth a lot in paper, but depending on personal situations, business situations, market situations, your wealth can scale or it can decelerate, fall, correct?
Yes.
And so from a risk management viewpoint, their fear is, you know what, these owners are not using diversification. We talk about portfolio diversification, but this is the worst example of portfolio diversification because there is no portfolio diversification. So
Absolutely.
all of their wealth is sitting in their company, doesn't have liquidity. It is prone to the ups and downs of not only the market, it's also prone to the ups and downs of their own business, right? For example, if the CEO has an accident and is incapacitated for 3 months, what happens to the business? I mean, we've had such strange situations. For example, one of the avid golfers,
Mhm.
founder CEOs, got hit by a golf ball
Oh my God.
and
Okay.
was out for 3 months. What happens to the company? Right? So these are, I think, some practical issues. So these two aspects are very important. One is exit is for growth, one aspect. The second aspect is exit is for portfolio diversification. Right? It's a
Absolutely.
way of hedging risk.
Got it. I think now we understood what is the logic we should put. So when you were saying about you should not be tied to the company, right? So tell us more about how do we keep aside a few examples where a normal person like me can understand what are the few things we should keep when you are having a company.
Okay. So I think mentally differentiating the role of founder from CEO. I think
Okay.
that's the first important realization. Saying that, look, as a founder, I'm accountable to nobody,
Mhm.
right? So I can do what I want. If I want to buy a Bentley, I can buy a Bentley. If I want to buy a jet, I can buy a jet. If I want to, own the building I am in, I can do that. I have all that leeway as a founder,
Mhm.
right? But as a CEO, I am accountable for my business. So I need to create a business plan with a horizon, which a lot of founders don't do, by the way.
Absolutely. I'm just hearing all these things. It's very, very interesting.
Yeah, they
Things.
don't do it. So how do you put together a business plan, right? Second, more important, how do you create a budget for the next year? And most important, how do you make yourself accountable for that budget? Because as a founder, it's okay, if you're off by 10%, up, down, 20% up, down, it's fine. As long as cash flow is there, you know, you have enough funds flow going through, then you're okay. But how do you bring this accountability into that? So taking these two roles apart, that's a very important. And the second way is to create accountability for yourself, is to have like a board of directors or a board of advisors.
Mhm.
And what that allows you to do is, even though you may be 100% owner of your business, it allows you to create an environment where you're not playing the role of founder, but you're playing the role of CEO. And you're reporting to the board saying, hey, this was my plan. This went well. This did not go well. This was the reason for the variance. And this is my corrective plan. And you're holding yourself accountable. And that will do wonders to your business. So if you had the opportunity to scale, this will propel you in that direction.
Excellent. So I always get stuck in the board and the founder and CEO. Always, even though they are not owners, but we are answerable to the board. Now I get the point
Exactly.
how the relation is happening. Excellent point that. So now, after 3 decades, you are in US now more than 3 decades. In your 3 decades of your journey, right? So what is the M&A scenario today, and what areas are getting merged and what areas are getting acquired, and what is the difference?
Okay. In general, there is always appetite for M&A.
Okay.
Because companies need funding to grow, right? And companies need to acquire to fill gaps in their strategy.
Yes.
Right? Take, for example, Cisco. Right? Cisco, any gap they find, they go out and acquire technology. And in fact, people who have sold to Cisco know the gaps. So they sell one company to Cisco, go out and build another technology, sell it to Cisco again, and so on. So that's another reason. The third is venture capitalists and private equity players also create a lot of momentum in the market, because they go and sometimes, especially private equity, they consolidate markets. They will assemble 5-6 small players and make it into a big player and multiply the valuation many times through that process. So there are all these forces. So there is always M&A. Now, as far as strategics are concerned, generally they always have an appetite for M&A, because if their own organic business is not growing, they need to find new growth areas, which you cannot invent it in-house suddenly. So you have to go and acquire a company that you think has potential, that can leverage your strengths and scale dramatically. So big companies always have an appetite. What changes in the market is the actual valuation. Valuations go up and down, right? That changes. But the volume of M&A, it alters, but generally, especially for strategic and Ps, they have so much money and so much appetite that there is always scope for M&A. But from a seller side, I think what's important is, how do you differentiate yourself in the market? If you're a vanilla commodity type business, right, then you're stuck at a certain valuation, good market, bad market, whatever, the variation is less. But if you're able to create differentiators and tell your story well, and look at what are your value drivers, what are your value destroyers, and focus on these in your planning and reviews and budgeting, etc., then you can actually control your valuation to a large extent, right? So as long as your services are not obsolete, your technology is not obsolete, and you're keeping up, then by focusing on these value drivers, you can actually increase your valuation. Because typically, larger companies with larger EBITDA are higher valued than smaller companies. Okay, because of the risk profile. Larger company, less risk; smaller company, more risk. If you have, let's say, if you have 50% or 60% or 70% of your revenue coming from one customer, you're very high risk. But if you have 5% coming from 20 customers, you're much lower risk. So all this comes into valuation, and therefore focusing on these become very important, and not so much on the market. The other aspect of it is that you cannot wake up one day and I'll say I will sell the company. I mean, you can, nothing prevents you, but that kind of effort will create a valuation loss for you. Absolutely. So we call those unplanned exits. Okay. Where you have not planned for it and suddenly somebody came and made an offer to you. And you said, oh, I never knew this. And you hastily want to get into that offer. Then typically what we find in the market is unplanned exits, there's a lot of value loss. Whereas if you plan for it and you're ready. So one of the areas where there is value loss, apart from pricing, etc., is in due diligence. Okay. So if there are risks that you have taken or approaches that you have taken that destroy value, right? A lot of times for you, it's normal. It's nothing unusual that you have done, so it's fine. But when the buyer looks at it, it comes up as a due diligence finding or a due diligence risk. And when that happens, it automatically hits value. Simple things, for example, it could be, if you're in India, for example, it could be something as simple as PF compliance.
Okay.
Right? Value-wise, it's not much. But from a buyer's viewpoint, the risk is jail.
Oh.
So it becomes a very kind of a strange, way of expressing risk. But that's for an example. For example, in the US, we find a lot of situations where the distinction between contractors and employees, if that's not managed well, then the buyer says, hey, you know what? After I do the acquisition, these contractors may say we want all the benefits as employees because the contractor-employee boundary has not been kept clean.
Oh.
Very common problem. Or visa-related issues, for example. H1s are not managed properly, whatever. So all these become due diligence risk factors. And unless you have planned for it and made sure that your company is managed well without any of these compliance issues, and you're 100% certain that no due diligence issue will come up because we have internally enough controls, right? Then whatever valuation you're getting, you can protect it. Otherwise, you may start at 100 as valuation, and then each due diligence finding, it keeps coming down, and then you're stuck with that situation. So that's an important consideration.
So Madhu, I clearly, from your explanation, it is very evident that whatever we do, the documentation should be very strong. So who will be the helping people? Is it an attorney, or is it a specific area people who can write all these documents? What is your suggestion for all the upcoming small businesses in US or in India?
Yeah, it's a team effort. So typically, a lot of it has to be done by the people within the company.
Okay.
And for specific areas, you can go out and get advice.
Okay.
Like, for example, legal, definitely, right? So having an attorney come, maybe review things with you on a quarterly basis or annual basis, and say that it's a little like, if you were doing ISO 9000, how would you do it? It's the same concept. This is ISO 9000 for your internal stuff. No different, right? So how do you set it up? How do you get it reviewed by an outsider? It's a little like an audit, so that they can tell you, hey, these are the weaknesses that we find. Therefore, fix these before you do anything else. Same thing with accountants, same thing with tax-related issues, same thing with HR, same thing with IT. For example, if you don't have strong IT talent inside, how are you managing security? How are you managing business continuity type issues, etc.? So all these are now fundamentals in a business. So whether you're doing it in-house or you're doing it with help, you need somebody to work with you on this. And as far as the transaction is concerned, you will need an advisor who understands how your business works and how transactions work, so that they can guide you and make sure you don't make mistakes.
Absolutely. So when you talk about the valuation, we talked about more about valuation and checks and balances, and the valuation comes because of these few points. So when you position your company, right, how do you set the valuation? Tell us like few things what we can take care, or is there any external agency like M&A associates or M&A audit function to be implemented? Tell us more, throw some light on these aspects, valuating or positioning of our company.
Yeah. So valuation is a very misunderstood term, because there is an assumption that if somebody got valued at X, you should also get valued at X. Right? Unless it's a very like-to-like business with a lot of other things being common, that's generally not true.
Okay.
So in the same marketplace, one company can get valued at X and another company can get valued at 1.5X, 2X, 3X, depending on what is their story.
Okay.
So there are several factors that affect valuation, but I'm just going to pick a top few. Okay. There are some quantitative factors and there are some qualitative factors. Quantitative factors are what is your revenue, what is your revenue growth?
Mhm.
How consistent is it? Okay, that drives valuation. The second is your margins, right? Start with gross margin. How is it maintained? Is it very up and down? What are the drivers that affect gross margin? How have you been managing that? Second. Third is EBITDA. Okay, earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, which is proxy for cash. How much cash is the company generating?
Okay.
Now, with a lot of our companies, which are smaller companies, we find that they're either S corps,
Yes.
LLCs, right, sole proprietorships, etc. And for them, what they do is they bring in a lot of outside expenses through their business
Okay.
to keep EBITDA down and therefore pay less tax.
Absolutely.
So it's a great strategy, no problem. But if you present that P&L to a buyer, if you're running, for example, at 25% EBITDA, but you're showing 5% EBITDA. Now your valuation, unless you explain it clearly, your valuation is going to be based on 5% EBITDA,
Oh,
not on 25% EBITDA. So these are all some typical mistakes that we see in the market because the founders sometimes don't understand the difference between these issues and the need to explain this or present the company with the real story rather than the real books, if you want to put it that way, right?
yeah.
So these are some of the areas where there are common issues. So all these affect valuation on the quantitative side. Same thing with cash flow, right? What is your collection cycle? Do you have good cash flow or are you always debt driven? What kind of a balance sheet do you have? Is it highly leveraged, not highly leveraged? So these are all quantitative measures. On the qualitative side, it is what kind of a customer base do you have?
Okay.
Okay, are these blue chip customers where the value of retention is very, very high, right? What kind of a management team do you have? Is it totally dependent on the founder? Right? Because if the founder then sells and the buyer buys the company and the founder goes away, then what is the buyer getting as value? They lost their key salesperson, they lost their key HR manager, they lost their key CFO. So what is left in the company? So these become issues. All of these affect valuation. So, and what kind of a brand name do you have? What kind of brand visibility do you have? And how? So it's a mix of these qualitative aspects and quantitative aspects that drive valuation.
Okay. So another question to our conversation is merging better or acquisition better? Or it's all depends upon the situation. How do you differentiate?
Well, these are more, I would say, semantics.
Mm-hmm.
The day you bring in outside equity into your company, you're in a transaction.
Absolutely.
The company is no longer 100% yours, right? So from the exit viewpoint or a M&A, which is a generic term viewpoint, every time you're bringing equity into your company, you are in a M&A transaction of some kind.
Unknowingly.
Okay.
Okay.
So if you're giving, the moment you give equity to somebody, it's no longer 100% owned company. So in a way, you're answerable to those new shareholders. And if they become bigger and bigger shareholders, they have more and more say in your company because especially if it is VCs, private equity, etc., they get on your board. And then it's no longer your company. I mean, though you may believe it is your company,
Absolutely.
because it has your name on it, it has the identity and all that connection. It is no longer only your company. It is a company owned by multiple people. In a way, it's a joint venture company, right? And so that's the way to look at it.
Absolutely. So, probably you might have, so your focus from VectorSpan is mostly American companies or Indo-American companies. How do you, what was your ratio in your overall maybe 15 years of experience, if you can say?
It's a good mix. We've had all kinds of companies. So we have companies that come to us for both domain and transaction experience.
Mhm.
And there are companies who come to us only for transaction experience, where we may not be experts in their domain. So we do work in the US, we do work with Indian companies, we do work with European companies. So, for example, some of the work we have done is divesting Indian subsidiaries of US companies.
Mhm.
Other work we have done is, for example, helping Indian companies do acquisitions in the US and in Europe.
Mhm.
Okay? Another one, which is also very different, is we have advised a company, a Swiss group, to divest their Swiss company to a Japanese company,
Wow.
which is purely cross-border.
Purely cross-border. Yeah.
Cross-border is where we have, I would say, significant experience, and we can bring a lot of value to the table, right? So it's a mix of within the border as well as cross-border transactions. Geography is no longer relevant because in M&A, the whole world is your market. Even if you're selling a company, for example, I mean, we sold the Swiss company I was telling you about. They were in digital process automation.
Okay.
And for them, the buyers could be anywhere in the world. They could have been in the US, they could have been in Europe, they could have been in Asia. So we basically talked to a whole host of companies around the world to see who would be the best fit for them and which would be a good home for that technology in terms of scaling. And we ended up selling them to Ricoh of Japan.
Rico. Okay. Mhm.
Right. So Swiss, Japanese, right? But the market we addressed was the whole, world. Companies in Australia, companies here in the United States, Europe, etc. So the borders, truly we are in a borderless world.
Absolutely. Because of the globalization.
Because of globalization and because of these markets are all, especially around technology, there is no geographical boundary.
Absolutely.
We're not shipping anything, right? So yeah.
That's a good thing now because of too much digitalization, social media world, and you can do anything across the world. So when you talk about due diligence, right? For example, if you buy a car, there are some 150-point inspections and that sort of. So for M&A on a company, do you have that kind of points? Tell us more about it.
We don't do due diligence ourselves. It's a
Okay.
very different kind of activity and it requires multi-pronged skills.
Mhm.
So what we do is we help our customers engage with specialists for due diligence, depending on their business. So the specialists could be, sometimes it could be the big four.
Mhm.
It could be law firms, etc. What we do is we provide the umbrella over that to say, okay, if the accountant said this and the tax guy said this and the lawyer said this and your internal folks are saying this, right? How do we bring this picture together and determine what's a red light risk, what's an orange light risk, and what's a green light risk? Green light, because the parsing of what's red, what's orange, what's green is a skill that is typically not there in most companies. It's a cross-functional skill.
Absolutely.
Right. And that's what we bring to the table, because having run companies, we can say, okay, we can tell them that, look, this risk does not seem to be a showstopper, but this other risk is a showstopper. So unless we come up with a concrete solution on how to manage that risk, this transaction should not go forward.
Okay.
And that's our value in these kind of areas. And
So
similarly, negotiating, what's the value of that due diligence finding? Because the buyer will say, it's the whole value.
absolutely.
It's an unsurmountable problem. The risk is enormous. We want to take 50% off the transaction value. And, getting them also to calm down and, getting the meeting of the minds, etc. This becomes And this is where the expertise is important.
So one other question comes to my mind when M&A sales process happens, right? Who would be the participants from both the companies, and from as an auditing function, you are facilitating this. So who will be the majority of the folks in this sales process?
Okay. There are multiple exit options.
Mhm.
The first is when you're getting investments into the company.
Okay.
The second could be when you're doing an outright sale. Third could be when you're doing a merger where you become part of something else and it becomes a combined entity where you are part owner, they are part owner, etc. Then there is another which is IPO,
Mhm.
where you're taking the company public. Right? And another one where you're selling your company to your managers. So it's an MBO, management buyout, where you're saying, I'm old, I'm retired, or I have some other things I want to do, not this. And I have a leadership team, and I'll structure it in such a way that the leadership team can buy the company, and I may remain as shareholder or not. So that's another way of, so the multiple exit options. So depending upon the exit options, your teams will be different, right? So if you're doing a public issue, then you need a public investment bank that manages public issues, because that's a completely different ball game. Whereas for all the others, you need a mix of somebody who can help you with due diligence. You need an advisor, investment or an investment banker or an M&A advisor who will help you structure everything, ensure that the process is managed properly and your time is focused on running the business, not on this. Because this may happen, may not happen, right? That risk is always there. So one of the biggest issues that we find with transactions is owners get too diverted in their attention, because this is more exciting. It's big money, a lot of things, a lot of personal issues coming up, etc. So they get very sidetracked into spending more and more of their time in the process. And in that situation, they spend less and less time with their customers, less and less time with their teams, leadership team.
Absolutely.
And as a result, during due diligence, instead of good news coming, saying we converted so many more proposals into orders, we bagged these new accounts, etc., you'll find that the pipeline came down because those three things didn't materialize. There was not enough energy following that. And in the process, they end up ruining their valuation.
Absolutely. Wow.
So it's a common problem. So it's typically the team is a mix of an advisor, an accounting firm, a tax firm, or a legal firm. That would be the typical common, and the internal team. The internal team is very important because it's the internal team that knows the data.
Yes.
Outsiders don't know the data. So when when sellers are selling their company, and this is very important from a valuation perspective as well, valuation is not just a number, because valuation has terms embedded in it.
Absolutely.
So it's always price plus terms. You have to look at the full picture. And price is not everything, because the price may be fantastic looking, but the terms may be atrocious. In which case you will never get the full price. It's like a bait and switch. So how do you protect from that? So that becomes important. So looking at these from the combined perspective of price and terms becomes very important. And so that's why you need the internal people to also be full participants in the conversation, because a lot of representations you're giving can have costs attached to them if they are wrong.
Okay. So when you say terms, can I understand the terms as like policies and the MSAs and how you transact between the customers, or between internally the
That is the
employees?
operational aspect of the terms, which is what is the risk in your contracts. That's one.
Okay.
But from an M&A viewpoint, the reps and warranties that you're giving start with, for example, that you're the full owner of the company, right? Now, typically in smaller companies, intellectual property is not protected very well.
Absolutely, you're right.
When you have consultants, sometimes it's work for hire contracts are not documented well. So after the transaction, one of them may wake up and say, hey, this is my product. I should get a share of this sale. Or this work is mine and you are violating my intellectual property. It could be simplistic things like that to something very complex, right? So these are all warranties that you give the buyer, saying, I'm telling you that this intellectual property is mine. I'm telling you that I own these trademarks. I'm telling you that all my accounts are GAAP compliant. So you give pages and pages of representations and warranties, right? And no other person is equipped to do it except for your own people, because they know the data, right? For example, my customer list is complete, or customers above 1 million revenue are all listed in this schedule, right? If you miss these things, and if it's incomplete or it has errors, it can open you up for a claim.
Wow.
And then it becomes a nightmare, right? Similarly, I was telling you about terms, right? The terms could be that you get 50% of the price upfront, and the other 50% is contingent on some conditions.
Mhm.
So the other 50%, for example, could be an earnout, where you have to meet some performance thresholds to
Absolutely.
get it. It could be over a 1 year period, 2 year period, 3 year period, whatever. Depends on how. So these things become important. So how is that earnout going to be measured?
Mhm.
Right? Do we have the same understanding? And it's amazing as to how much confusion we see with companies when there is earnout. Definition of revenue becomes a conversation.
Absolutely.
There is no clear definition. Definition of earnings, definition of cash, everything is to be defined, so that both parties understand clearly and it doesn't end up in litigation afterwards. So that's why terms become very important. And so
Great.
that's the combination that's always important. And this is again a common mistake. People say, oh, I got 10x EBITDA or 3x revenue, well, offer, fantastic. But that's not the real story.
When it comes
You have to
to
see what's hiding behind that to see whether the 3x is real or 10x is real or whatever is real. And so these are all nuances in the big implications in
I
in
could
that.
see the stress of being an entrepreneur now, how much documentation go through until the company is running, you're making money, you're spending, it doesn't matter. But when it comes to sale, I see that what you're trying to say. So in the interest of time, I think it's a very, very interesting conversation. I think we should have a next part of it to see how many types of M&As are there and all those kinds of stuff. To end this particular show, I just wanted to conclude with one question, that is, what are the common mistakes made by Indo-Americans from your observations? That would be very interesting for me for this show, being very specific to NRIs and Indo-Americans.
Yeah, I think not creating a professional team under themselves,
Mm-hmm.
right? Delegating, etc., keeping it as an owner-led company. And owner, nobody asks questions. The owner can do whatever they want. Owner can set whatever pricing, offer whatever terms, can engage in any expenses they want. Nobody asks questions, right? So that, I think, is the fundamental thing, that differentiating owner from CEO.
Okay.
Having a leadership team with the CEO. So running it like I would say, in everybody's mind, their company should be run like a public company. It may be small, big, it doesn't matter. Run it like a public company, right? So get a team, put your systems in place, processes in place, don't take shortcuts, because anything you do as a shortcut will come back and bite you many-fold when you're in these conversations, when you're in M&A conversations. So I would say that is very important. One. The second is, without growth, there's no value. Be clear about it, right? So you can't say, oh, I'm generating so much cash every year. That's great. But that will take your valuation only to a certain level. So unless you show scaling, right? And so look at your value drivers, value destroyers. How do you identify those for your business? And start focusing on that becomes the other part. I'd say these are the two more important things. So yeah.
Very, very interesting. So I think probably the message is for everyone, you need to focus on your team, differentiate the owner from the CEO, and definitely put more processes in place and
Run your company like a public company.
Run like a public company.
Run like a public
Absolutely. I think it's a great insight, Mr. Madhugaro, for your time. And probably I will set up some time in the coming weeks, because this is very, very important. Most of our viewers will be Indo-Americans, and we need people like you to guide them and run their businesses, thinking what will be in the future. If you get into an M&A, what will be our status when you get into there? So finally, I think that's a great message. And do you have any message for the new entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I think for the new entrepreneurs, I think the important thing is to say, whatever you do today, keep in mind the long term. Keep in mind that the moment you give equity to somebody, it's an exit transaction, right? It will happen. It's not a question of will it happen or not. It's a question of when will it happen. And be always prepared for the when. So don't do anything short term, which is convenient, which affects your long term, because those are very difficult to change, right? It's a little like in systems analysis and design, right? Taking a shortcut on analysis
Absolutely
creates tremendous cycles in testing, which are very expensive, and rework, which is even more expensive. So anything you do right from the get-go, keep the exit perspective in mind, and let that also drive your decisions. Whether it is choice of customers, pricing, the way you write your contracts, etc., be conscious of it. So in some situations, you may be forced to take short-term.
Absolutely.
It's okay, but do it with realization, so that you are conscious that you took a shortcut here, but you will not do it next time. So that way, planning for this will help you build a more valuable company.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your insights, and all the viewers. Hope you have enjoyed the conversation on the M&A with Mr. Madhu. And if you have any sort of questions, please feel free to reach out. And definitely, Mr. Madhu will be for all of us to help and be successful in your entrepreneurship. And think about the M&A right from the initial stage and run like a public company. That's what the message from Mr. Madhu. And with this, we will close this show, and we will come up with more interesting show. Thank you so much, Madhu, again, for contributing your valuable time during the weekends. Again, thank you so much.
You're welcome. I hope it's useful.
Thank you.